Friends, boom, bada boom. The walls were shaking for Russians. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was attacked. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, CABs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh-555 and Kh-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 were damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter were hit. 13 Russian radar stations were hit. And in Russia, they claim that the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst, Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one ill, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning an IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of Kh-101 missiles. And in Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because there was a large-scale attack, and the attack was carried out by drones, most likely by a missile. There was a big boom. Since there was a big boom, then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles. I don't even rule out the possibility that a long-range Neptune was used in this direction. And naturally, the detonation that occurred after the strike and the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition, the small arms that are loaded into aircraft, were damaged. And of course, the planes parked nearby could not have escaped damage. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think that within a few days, our intelligence, our general staff, will confirm it after analyzing satellite images and decoding them. That is, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll have another reason to celebrate. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm this clearly with you.
Roman Grigorievich, so what could have been hit? So the bombers themselves, the cruise missile storage, and the aviation fuel depot. So these were the targets of the armed forces of Ukraine, our missiles and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, to put it simply, like a large city. In addition to the airfield itself, a huge number of infrastructure facilities of various types are involved in its operation. This ranges from underground fuel storage tanks holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene to various depots, including ISI warehouses. Particularly important is the special engineering service for missile preparation and, of course, the storage of aviation bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, not many people talk about this, but several dozen kilometers south of Engels, along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility known as Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads intended for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles of the 12th GUMO, the 12th main directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically of tactical nuclear weapons stored there. So just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels there. It would be a massive one reaching all the way to Kazakhstan. The Kazakhs would have seen it already. It's just a shame. There are too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I'd hate to disappoint them like that, but still. So this is a really serious facility, and you can't just take it out with rockets and drones. To level it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers carpet bombing the place. But if you blow up that underground fuel storage facility, let me repeat, we're talking about tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railway tank cars of this kerosene. That's over 150 tons of aviation kerosene being filled up, and for the Tu-95, it's 1 railway tank car, which is still a lot. And there are definitely targets worth hitting there. If a strike were to be delivered against all these facilities, it could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our 2 aircraft, both the Tu-160, Tu-95, and Tu-22, as well as our Kh-55 missiles. Hundreds of missiles were handed over back then by Kuchma. That was exactly what Kuchma was involved in, at least And now essentially we'll be trying to destroy the very same strategic bombers that we once handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, that will become clear in the next few days once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Grigorievich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases, military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks and the area involved varies. But at the very least, there should definitely be a regiment stationed there. About 1,500 Russian federal troops should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have effectively eliminated enemy personnel with these precise strikes, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, definitely 100%. The thing is, even the EIS, that's the Engineering and Technical Service, a special engineering service. Of course, there's also security, the defense of the facility itself, and the storage of missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches after all. There are even certain climate control mechanisms there, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen people were definitely taken out, and the remaining hundreds, well, they definitely cleared out after that strike. Believe me, the shockwave there was serious.
Roman Grigorievich, it's true. The Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a whole day now after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile, as well as the strikes on oil refineries and depots. Regarding Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Malyuk and Budanov's sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why is that? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved. That is at the very least, and probably also the naval fleet, if a Neptune coastal missile system was used, at least the launch platform was involved. But I think within a day it will become clear. Neptune long, it's the same situation. That is, it is launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, Nishpapa is involved in this. The main targets for this type of missile are objects that need to be breached. For example, a warhead of 150 kilograms is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or 50 or however much they carry. A 150 kilogram warhead can reach and detonate, as we are seeing now, presumably, let's put it that way for now. They presumably blew up a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs in Engels. Naturally, the very same type of powerful warhead can be effectively used against TUAPs, for example, or alternatively to breach the critical detonation system at various pumping stations. So this is currently one of our main objectives. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these people who are not part of our government are running around with the idea of how to secure Russia's hydrocarbon industry. So God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If the sanctions from Malyuk and Budanov hadn't been stopped in May last year, there wouldn't be any this year, because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything down last year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes again. The missile is very good. It's our basic Neptune missile, or Long or Neptune. This is basically the X-35 missile. At one time it was also produced at our facility. Our engines for this missile are dual circuit turbojet engines. The missile was air-to-ship. That is its main purpose. In other words, it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike land targets, equipped with a good engine and additional fuel tanks. Now it can travel more than 500 kilometers, meaning it reached at least as far as Tuapse, which is 500 kilometers away. I think it could have also struck Engels because they managed to breach a storage facility that was closed. Well, those missiles aren't just lying around outside. In other words, it's secured. If it was breached, it most likely means a missile got in, but there is no confirmation yet. We won't confirm it for now either. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Grigorievich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Can we record that now?
Well, the missile's range, at least the confirmed one, is 500 to 600 kilometers, that's for sure. We saw this with Tuapse and perhaps now with Engels as well. There it's a little over 600 kilometers. That's the actual stated range. So what does 500 or 600 kilometers mean? Well, it's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to Tuapse. So if you draw that circle, that's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. And if the stated range is 1,000 kilometers, you could put the compass in St. Petersburg, for example, and draw a semicircle that almost reaches the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would go beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, that's possible. Basically, the engine is very good. Our engine, the one we produce, it will definitely run for an hour, and the missile's speed is 850 kilometers per hour. Well, running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. So however many extra buckets of fuel you put into the missile, that's how far it will fly.
So Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other significant military infrastructure targets could potentially be attacked then?
Well, definitely they're already under serious targeting. And in order for us to fully carry out our tasks of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to be able to reach the Urals. So it's 2,000 kilometers to the Ural. But a cruise missile, there's hardly any point, for example, in making cruise missiles with that kind of range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, which are a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. So for that kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, meaning ballistic missiles. I think we'll solve this issue, if not this year, then next year.
Roman Grigorievich, there's more good news. The main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea, hitting air defense system positions. Ships and a helicopter were hit in the strikes. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125 Niobiy-SV and the BRLS MICE. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and it has now been documented.
Well, this definitely took several months. This is the work of the GUAR's Magurbeks. The main intelligence directorate and the security service have their own BECs, and they've practically turned these unmanned boats into aircraft carriers. Both types, the Megur from the GUR and the Saibibi from the SBU, can now essentially function as aircraft carriers carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, specifically drones. They can also carry unmanned surface and underwater vehicles, meaning they can serve as a kind of mothership and relay station at the same time. For example, a substantial boat that's several meters in length and a certain significant width can effectively take unmanned aerial vehicles on board, then carefully approach the coast of Crimea or some other strategic location, perhaps somewhere on Russian territory, specifically closer to Novorossiysk, and just a few crucial kilometers from the shore, launch these drones under direct, precise control, utilizing the boat itself as a vital relay station. Okay. The guys can carry out a combat mission just like they do directly with, for example, those same FPV drones. So a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target, depending on its capabilities. Plus, especially the GUR's BECs can also carry sea-to-air missiles. For example, based on the launch platform, it's an R-73 air-to-air missile, an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have thousands of them. It has a heat-seeking homing head, and if you lock on, once the missile acquires the target, it will catch up and hit it. And if there are two missiles, these BECs can carry two missiles, then they can also destroy aerial targets. Here's confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed, and that's for sure, not just one either. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR guys have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that isn't really its own and has performed quite well there. And the security service under Maliuk, that is the GUR led by Budanov and the SBU led by Maliuk, are now using practically the entire range of strike capabilities. And what's very important is that they're producing them on their own bases. These are intelligence agencies operating on their own bases at their own expense. They still have relatively small budgets. These aren't the armed forces of Ukraine. These aren't Umerov's billions or hundreds of billions in funding. So they're operating at their own expense. They've found sponsors most likely and perhaps have managed to accomplish this kind of task. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to say.
Roman Grigorievich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian military correspondents, I would like you to give a brief overview of the Ukrainian missile system Hrom-2. What are its potential capabilities, and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, to understand the process, what is Hrom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander in terms of range, warhead, and control system. We have the same kind of Iskander ourselves. It was just a few decades ago, in a time not so long past, that a truly excellent and highly promising project known by the name Sapsan was successfully initiated and officially launched. Based on this SAPSON, a solid fuel ballistic missile system was allocated for the Hrom project, and naturally, this project produced results. So work on this Hrom 1, Hrom 2 project is ongoing. Now we have a range of 300 kilometers. We made it and sold it to the Saudis, by the way, with Saudi money, including selling it along with the technical documentation. But most likely the intervention of our partners allowed us to at least get the technical documentation back, maybe some launchers, and I wouldn't rule out possibly even some missiles as well. So that's what Hrom 2 is. It's basically the same as the Iskander, 500 kilometers Moscow to Tuapse. That's those 500 kilometers. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, Rubliovka's escorts would be better off staying far away from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because, the first strike, the first thunder really ought to bury Lenin, because honestly, how much longer does he need to lie there after all? The Kremlin is first and second is Rubliovka, or the other way around, depending on preferences. Maybe Rubliovka will be the first to go, actually.
Roman Grigorievich, now of course this information has been circulating for several days already in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents. Because in Russia, they are claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
Well, to understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border. If you don't count the twists and turns, just the straight border between Belarus and Oskol, that's between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Chernihiv, or rather the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, that's the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So our main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. We need to change the architecture of the front to open up the northern front. It's already open after we started moving toward the Kursk direction, what some extremely panicked idiots call the Moscow direction, under the main objective of tying down enemy forces. Several tens of thousands of Russian troops were pinned down there, and naturally, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, it can be called differently, security zones if it's a front line and a mined strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory. And the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So such a buffer zone can be created by advancing not even 30 kilometers, but just 3, 5, or 7 kilometers into Russian territory and mining not our land, but Russian territory. If you lay down several 100,000 of these mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even bother at all. And naturally, army artillery with a range of 25 kilometers will add to the creation of such a buffer zone, extending it up to 30 kilometers. In the Kursk direction, we created it, we accomplished this. The only thing is, as we've already mentioned, the retreat, the flight, was almost catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and redeploy to defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep, without an operational breakthrough. It's a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best, most advantageous defensive positions. The thing is, the difference in elevation there, it's the so-called central Russian upland. The difference in height is about 50 to 70 meters between, just for understanding, between the hills, right? So the rivers, or rather the little streams that are there, you could spit across them. They're at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230. So these elevation changes, it's best to take control of the high ground no matter where it is, on our side or the Russian side. If there is an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now, in the area of Demidovka, a mission is being carried out in the direction of Belgorod. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating such a buffer zone. And the second issue is to try to intercept the Russian reserves that will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw along the borderline and will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up on the Pokrovsky direction. They have about 2 divisions there, which is practically 30,000 Russian federal troops who could now be redeployed from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front. They will be passing right by, or rather through the Belgorod region. And so in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod area. At least for now, there is positive momentum. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters, even if we knew them. Well, you can't broadcast tactical information on air, but really, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians have claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake. And here's what Andriy Demchenko says. The Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. The new Ukrainian armed forces are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was some good footage of F-16s being used over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian FSO acted differently. They did the right thing. Well, from the standpoint of operational logic, they handled it correctly. Our own CPD and SIPSO people should take a page from their book as well. After all, FSB or KGB officers have been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. The FSO had to respond to this because the appearance of F-16s practically at the line of contact really put pressure on the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely for dropping ordnance. Some types of munitions were deployed below the radar horizon of Russian air defenses. Naturally, no one could reach them, and this really put pressure on the Russians in that direction. Naturally, they needed to override this information. They came up with another piece of disinformation, claiming they shot down an F-16 in that direction. Believe me, no one shot anything down. Well, I have friends, a good number of friends, who would have shared the information if anything had actually happened. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are operating along the entire line of contact on F-16S and Mirages. They've already started carrying out combat missions, performing tasks in those directions where it's possible, based on the density of the enemy's air defenses and our own ability to cover these aircraft. God's due. All right, first fill in the blanks yourselves so I don't have to swear too much. So this so-called God's due in the eyes of former President Trump was meticulously organized and orchestrated by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And for what purpose? Well, to create a certain pressure on the Ukrainian side. It's the same thing, the same IPSO and information psychological special operation in which the heads of state are participating. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? To give the Russian, primarily the Russian population, and of course Trump, a chance to try to suppress Ukraine, to paint some alternative picture of the real events on the Kursk land. We are holding the Kursk land. No one is encircled there. We are holding on. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat indeed, a belated flight. If a month and a half ago, as we said, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled retreat to defensive lines. But this was a flight. Still, it was to defensive lines located on Russian territory. The difference is this: the Sudzha River in Kursk, well, in the Kursk region, there's the Peraplyuika River, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby, further south, the elevation is already about 220 meters. So here, there's at least a 50 to 70 meter difference in elevation, and this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudzhensky direction have taken up positions. And at the moment, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. The boss is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything is lost, and so on and so forth. They're trying to cut us off, but encirclement is still a long way off. It's simply unrealistic because this reach runs along the borderline. And of course, our troops are present on Kursk soil. I don't think we're going to leave from there. There's a good defensive line there. And as for the Russians who are now trying to cut off our direction, they've gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, meaning it's Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers from the borderline, nothing more. They're trying to somehow break through and cut off the supply to this group. And in the information space, to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin threw some divine dew, so to speak, at Trump. And now Trump is mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes have started against the Houthis, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians have their say there, it definitely won't end well for anyone involved. Most likely, strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into them, and now he has nowhere to go. Well, Witkoff dragged him in. After all, he's such a great Israeli-American, or maybe an American-Israeli. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds will continue to burn, maybe not as intensely, and it will be presented a bit differently, not as sanctions from, say, the Ukrainian defense forces, but as the work of various levels of local underground resistance. I think that this kind of work by our informants, by the way, could be just as effective as the Ukrainian defense forces are now. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. And as for the several million people from Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, well, you won't be able to turn them around either.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in the comments to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.